Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Hey there. Thank you for stopping by. Now I hope you're into spooky, scary, and startling stories, because I have a whole slew of them to share with you this evening. True stories about monsters, ghosts, UFOs, strange abilities, and a whole lot more. And here at Monsters Among Us, we pride ourselves on getting straight to the content that brought you here, the spooky stuff. So I'll quit jawing and get us started on tonight's opener. So coming to us from the rolling hills of Virginia, please welcome Hannah to tonight's episode.
Hi Derek, this is Hannah. I am 19. I live in Virginia, and I'd say it was probably 9th grade at the latest, but maybe middle school, I'm not sure, maybe 8th grade. So I was home alone, and I was sitting at the table, and the way that my house is, I can see the front door from the table, but between the dining room and the living room, there are stairs, and so, there are walls that block it, but it's more of an open plan. It's not any closed doors involved. Anyway, so I was sitting at the table, facing the windows outside, the door was closed, and all of a sudden, I hear this, heavy breathing from the living room, and I'd never heard it before. I've lived in this house basically my whole life. It's not a super old house, and I didn't have any pets at the time. I was used to all the normal weird sounds that a house makes. I know what my AC sounds like, everything like that. And this was a sound that I had never heard before at all, and it sounded like a man was standing in my living room, heavy breathing. I don't know. It was weird. So naturally I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I hear someone breathing in the house. And she was like, okay, Hannah, well, go to the door, make sure it's unlocked, and then, check the living room. Now, I would just leave. But I got a knife, and I walked into the living room, and I could not find anything. Nothing at all. Everything was fine. I was still on the phone with my mom, but it was just weird because it just stopped. And, I don't know. I don't know what happened. It was really spooky, but that is my story. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Bye.
Thank you, Hannah. This story sort of reminds me of an ongoing saga that my stepmother's mother is going through right now. So I guess my step-grandmother. Anyway, she lives in an apartment complex for the elderly. Just a little one-bedroom place on the outskirts of town, back home. Now, she moved there a year or so back, and when she did, my dad helped her find some newish furniture to make her new pad more comfortable. And one of the items he brought over was an old couch. Now, the couch, which he required from our friend and neighbor growing up, a gentleman I've told stories about on several occasions throughout this show's run. And that man believes that he bought the couch at a yard sale many years ago. Either way, the couch is older. It's from the 1980s or early 90s, but it was in pretty good shape, save for one mysterious stain on one of the cushions. Well, at first, everything was great with this new piece of furniture. That is, until bad feelings started infiltrating the tiny apartment. Then that's when something very strange began to happen. She began to notice sounds emanating not only from the couch, but from the stain on the cushion. Breathing sounds, almost as if the couch itself was taking a breath, holding that breath for a moment, then exhaling and repeating the process over and over. She suffered alone with this strange visitor for a good while before she finally decided to share her ordeal with my stepmom and my dad. In fact, Dad called me a few weeks back asking my advice on how she should handle the situation. That's where things got a little complicated, because the complex that she lives in has strict rules about open flames. She's not able to burn sage, candles, or anything like that. She's also limited on the number of guests she can have, which presents a bit of a challenge when it comes to investigating the location. Now, the last I heard, she got fed up and got rid of the couch, and that seemed to take care of the breathing sounds, at least for a few days. She's now reporting that whatever the deep breathing, unseen entity is, it's now taken up residence in her bed. Her latest claims are that this unseen presence has taken over the bedroom, breathing and even snoring alongside her in bed as she tries to sleep at night. Now, as of yesterday, the activity had not waned in any way, and she's to the point now where she barely speaks about it, although the strange activity continues. Now, folks, I'll be sure to update all of you should I learn any more information about this particular case. But for now, that's the current situation. A situation that I couldn't help but parallel with Hannah's. So thank you again, Hannah, for giving me the opportunity to share my step-grandmother's unique experience.
Even be a single.
According to USA.
One option.
Now, if you follow Monsters Among Us on social media, you've likely seen pictures of our cat, Izzy. She's our baby, and when she's healthy, she's happy, and that makes me happy. But since I'm not a mind reader, I don't always know when she's not feeling her best. Thankfully, Pretty Litter helps me keep tabs on Izzy's health. Pretty Litter's ultra-absorbent crystals trap odor instantly, and thank goodness for that, seeing as it seems like Izzy purposely chooses to use the litter box right before we sit down to eat a meal. I'm sure other people's cats do that as well. Well, Pretty Litter's super light crystal base also minimizes mess and dust. Izzy's not tracking litter all over the house or leaving litter-covered footprints on the floor anymore. And here's the best thing about Pretty Litter. It changes color to help you monitor early signs of potential illness, including urinary tract infections and kidney issues, which is super important to us. We know firsthand how important it is to catch these issues early, and Pretty Litter gives us peace of mind that everything is okay with our baby. Pretty Litter ships free in a small, lightweight bag. It's simple, convenient, and we never run out. Pretty Litter helps keep tabs on Izzy's health and keeps odors down. You and your cat are going to love Pretty Litter as much as we do. Go to prettylitter.com/MAU and use code MAU to save 20% off your first order and get a free cat toy. That's prettylitter.com/MAU. Code MAU to save 20% and get a free cat toy. prettylitter.com/MAU. Code MAU. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details.
California, 925. Seen waiting on a tow truck.
Now, next up, I have a few shorter entries I'd like to dig into. First, with this one from Josh over in Vermont.
Hi, Derek. This is Josh. I'm calling from Vermont. I've called a few times with a few different stories for you. And I was on the way to the gym this morning around 4:30, and I was coming around the corner. It's like 40 degrees out, snowy-ish. And I looked up and I saw these long, cylindrical-looking light up in the sky. And at first I thought it was like a house, but as I kept going, I would notice that it was above the mountains, and it was just sitting there still. And it had red and green and blue and orange lights just slowly going across, like pulsating each. And then all of a sudden it got super bright, and then it just disappeared. And I kept driving, and I kept looking for it, and I couldn't find it anymore. I don't know what it was. It definitely wasn't a house. I've seen UFOs out here before, years ago. It's been a while. And my family's seen them. We had a triangular one fly over our house when I was a young kid. I don't know what it was. I guess it could have been a giant house in the distance, but there really aren't any mountains around, like, where the area was, so I'm really not sure. But yeah, I just figured I'd call it in. After I saw it, I was going to get a picture, but there was no way. It was too far and too high up for me to really be able to focus it with my phone, especially when I was driving. So hopefully you can use it, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Now, you know, this isn't our only jaunt up to the Green Mountain State tonight. I have another strange story from that area coming up later in the episode. More on that here in a bit. And you know, I can understand how a distant, lit-up house could confuse Josh enough to make him think it was a floating UFO. Living up here in the mountains, that sort of thing happens from time to time. Because you see, when it's nice and dark outside, it's sometimes hard to determine where the skyline ends and the sky begins. And with all the hills, valleys, and mountains up here, that skyline could literally be anywhere. But as Josh mentioned, this wasn't a mountainous area, so perhaps that explanation is, as Josh suggested, less likely. But whatever it was he saw that evening, we sure do appreciate him sharing it here with us. So thank you again, Josh. It certainly sounds like you witnessed something pretty exciting. Now I have another shorter entry that I'd like to share. This one out of the plains of Iowa. Carrie, welcome to tonight's show.
Hi, Derek. This is Carrie. I'm from Brighton, Iowa. I have a story that my friend told me. So one night he was outside his house, which he lives right next to a baseball field, which is like literally right next to a cornfield. And he was on the phone. Then all of a sudden he heard like this weird screaming cry thing. And he had looked over towards the baseball field because we have a mud pit there because we have a mud run every year. And he sees this creature on all fours. And then all of a sudden the creature sees my buddy and he stands up and then starts running towards my buddy. Well, my buddy gets into the house and he locks the door. And as he locked the door, something is literally sitting there trying to pick the lock. So my buddy had went to go get his dad, and his dad was like, okay, you must be, hallucinating or something, because his dad's not a believer in supernatural. Well, they were both standing by the front door, and for 3 minutes straight, they heard a little kid crying. For 3 minutes straight, they didn't go out for the rest of the night. Well, he gets a hold of me, and he's like, hey, he told me what happened. And so the next day we had gone to the ball field during the day to see if it left any tracks. So we go there, and sure enough, there was these weird track prints from the mud pit to his house. And ever since then, we've never gone to the ballpark at night. But I love the podcast. I just started listening to it. I listen to the work all the time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, Carrie. I can think of few things more terrifying than a screeching creature coming at you on all fours. But a screeching creature coming at you on all fours, then picking the lock on your front door, just might be one of them. Toss in a crying baby and you have one of the most terrifying scenarios imaginable. And I shudder to think what this entity could have been. But we thank you again, Gary, for sharing it. And for laying the groundwork for a couple nightmares. And if you do ever go back to that ballpark, please hit me up if you notice anything out of the usual. Now, before we venture back to Vermont and join our next caller, a quick reminder to visit our merchandise shop at monstersamonguspodcast.com and by clicking on the shop tab. There you will find an array of custom items designed exclusively for Monsters Among Us, from artists like Brett Manning, Caitlin Grabenstein, Kit Fox, Chuddy Winks, Easton Hawk, Adam Parnell Deal, Jordan Hirschberger, Hog Island Press, Maximus Prime Art, Liz Pavlovic, Greg Johnson, Cryptid Zoo, Erie Eric, and of course, Jonathan Dodd, who gave us our latest design, just in time for those summer nights around the campfire. So, visit monstersamonguspodcast.com, then click that shop tab to get your hands on something spooky to wear, use, or display. And I never thought to mention it here, but we also include a free sticker in each and every order. It's a luck of the draw on which one you get, but it is absolutely free. And of course, all proceeds from the shop help us continue to grow and continue producing content. Content like this incredible account from an anonymous caller, and you guessed it, Vermont.
Hey Derek, this is a caller from northern Vermont. This is a tale that happened maybe 5 years ago. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened to me, but this is a particularly scary one. I had just got done a college class for charcuterie, which was pretty cool. It was a really hot day, and I was heading home to share my charcuterie, all my smoked meats with my wife and kids. But I was heading on the back roads, and northern Vermont, people are poor. There's not a lot of, nice houses up here. And I come upon these three kids that were sitting on the edge of the road. Again, it wasn't anything new. And I waved like I do to everybody on the back roads, and one of the kids waved. It was a girl. There was two girls and a boy dressed in shabby clothes, and thought nothing of it and headed down the road. I just happened to look in my rear view mirror to see what the kids were doing, and they were right behind my car running. Probably the scariest I've ever been. I moved it up to 40 miles an hour, and they were still right behind me. Then all of a sudden, before that, I should say that because it was so hot, it was a really hot July day or June day, I forget, and I could hear them talking amongst each other, and not talking like they were running, talking like as if they were talking like across the room, which is weird. As soon as I started getting freaked out, I look in the rear and they take a complete 90-degree turn to the left and shoot up a hill. I would say maybe the speed of sound. I don't know what it looks like. I mean, I was in the military. I don't know what the speed of sound looks like, but it was fast. And they just took a right angle and up the hill and gone. I don't know if this has anything to do with the story. I got home. My son was waiting outside the door. I was, what the hell? And he was freaked out. Our dog, our little Chihuahua, had a seizure. He wanted me to add I don't think it has anything to do with it. But he said, but that happened that same day. I said, yeah, I'll add it. It was just really weird. I don't know if this is a black-eyed kids thing or a ghost thing. Who knows? But thank you, Derek. Love the show. Really, really love the show, and I'm going to continue to listen. All right, take care, buddy.
Thank you, caller. Now look, I'll be honest with you. I have no idea what the speed of sound looks like either, especially on a Vermont hillside. But for those of you that skipped science class in high school, the speed of sound is about 761 miles an hour. That's 1,100 feet per second. And if I'm honest, I'm not even sure that the naked eye could register something going that fast in such tight confines. But I think our caller's point here was that the children were moving incredibly quickly, quicker than any human should be able to move. At least that's the information I got when I read between the lines. But identifying these super children, I'm afraid that's an egg I cannot crack. Perhaps some sort of Eastern skinwalker, aliens in disguise, ghosts or time travelers, or possibly, as our caller suggested, the infamous black-eyed kids. Since I'm at a loss for words, if anyone out there has any insight on this story, I'm all ears. And as far as the little pup's seizure is concerned, I suppose it could have been related in some way. I don't think it hurts anything to include the detail, though I imagine many might toss it out. Either way, it's always good to explore all the data available. Then all that irrelevant info can be weeded out from there. But regardless of who they were and how they managed to move so quickly, we thank you again, caller, for taking the time to share that intriguing experience.
Breakfast deal. Freddie Coleman, appreciate you joining us. This report is...
Listen, we all have bad habits, and we all do what we can to keep them in check. But when you're out late at night with your buddies, and they whip out their bad habits, and, well, instantly you feel the need to bum one. Does this sound familiar to you? Well, what if I told you there's a better alternative that helps you kick your bad habit in an enjoyable way? Something you can take out with you. Well, that's where tonight's sponsor, Fume, comes in. It's an award-winning flavored air device. The flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. It's a whole new movement toward better habits, led by Fume. I wasn't sure what to expect when I first tried Fume, but I've been really enjoying the flavors. My go-to is crisp mint, but I'm also quickly becoming a fan of the vanilla orange. And the look of the device itself is really cool. It's a sleek shape made with real wood, and it's made to fidget with, which is great for calming anxiety. I use mine all the time while I'm sitting here in the studio. Now, Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code MONSTERS to get a free gift with your journey pack. Head to tryfume.com/monsters. That's tryfume.com/monsters, and use code MONSTERS to get a free gift with your order today.
$1 billion.
Now for this next call, we head down to North Carolina. Seems we've been hearing a lot out of that state as of late. Well, this time around, we hear from Adrian, who has a story primed and ready for us. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Ooh, I'm excited to share. I just found this podcast today, and I'm stuck in the house with COVID. So what do I have better to do? Absolutely nothing. And I have a wonderful story. My name's Adrian. I am calling from North Carolina. Both of these sightings took place in North Carolina, and they're about 30 years old, and they have some recent validation, which is even cooler. First story, I was in 4th grade. We moved into this older house in North Carolina, and for whatever reason, I got the biggest room, and I remember it had these big magical windows, and I used to spend a lot of time alone playing with my dolls and doing my own thing, and I would stare out the windows. And I loved the book The Secret Garden as a little girl, and the backyard definitely reminded me of that secret garden. Had some old worn brick paths leading to a bird bath, beautiful ivy covered brick walls surrounding it, and I would just stare, and I would see an apparition of a little girl on cloudy, misty days only. The weather had to be just right, but I noticed that she would walk around the bird bath, peer inside, would tend to the garden. She never seemed to notice me. I was never scared of her. She never looked at me, but I saw her. She seemed like an old photograph. Her details weren't particularly sharp. It was almost kind of grayscale, the best way to describe that. And I never told anyone. I grew up in a family that didn't necessarily induce open, honest communication, so I kept it to myself. And about 20 years after that sighting, I was working at a salon, and we had a new cleaning lady. she mentioned that she moved into a home and they were remodeling it. She starts describing the house. It was that same house. And I asked who had my bedroom. I was curious. She said her daughters actually were both upstairs, but they had requested to move downstairs because they kept seeing this little girl in the garden. And I described the little girl to her, and her eyes got big, and I said, yeah, I saw her too. And I just assured that mom that, I didn't have any nefarious dealings with her, but yeah, she's there. And then the second sighting, it was a different house. In that house, my room was the dining room. So I had these swinging doors. And I remember laying in my bed at night alone, obviously. All the lights were off in the house. And I'm just trying to go to sleep. I had a really hard time falling asleep as a kid. My mind was always racing, thinking about things. And I start to notice, I don't know if I'm sure some of you out there remember Slimer in Ghostbusters and that green color. Now, the green that I started seeing is a different color than I've ever seen in my real life. I'm in a bed that my dad had made. It was a high-level water bed. I'm high up off the ground, and I'm trying to fall asleep desperately. I'm just staring into the void, into the blackness, and I start to see the Ghostbuster green, that Slimer green, sinewy, smoky. It illuminated, had a luminescent quality to it, and it starts creating the outline silhouette of a man sitting in our old brown corduroy recliner chair that I could see from my bed. And it starts to outline this man, and he's got a bald head, he has a monocle, he has a handlebar mustache, he has a vest. I see these details. They're not fleshed out at all, unlike the previous ghost girl that looked like a faded photograph. This was it was like a live action energy creating this character in front of my eyes. And I'm not believing it. I'm rubbing my eyes furiously, expecting it to go away. And it doesn't go away. Instead, it gets brighter and more intense and more detailed. And it was like a bad movie, you guys. I get up out of the bed. I start walking towards it. I'm a kid. I was like, it's 4th grade, 5th grade? Anyway, I start walking towards it. And it does not go away. It gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And the head of the man shoots off the body across the room, shoots into our fireplace. The sinews of the neck are still attached. There's no blood, there's no gore. This is all in this green ectoplasm, phantom, whatever, ether material. And I scream, and I run back to the room, and I'm screaming, and I'm crying. And my mom and dad came in the room. And again, not a family that we shared things with. So I lied and said I had a nightmare about spiders because I hated spiders. So that was that. 20 years later, I am living with my older brother in Asheville. We have a mutual friend over. We're talking spooky stories. And her name was Beth. She had a ghost story. And my brother, out of nowhere, he's like, I actually saw a ghost. He starts to describe that house, that chair, and I complete his sentences the same way I finished describing the ghost girl for the other lady. I just finished my brother's story. We both look at each other. We have this moment of awareness that we both saw the same specter. And that's it. I haven't seen anything since I was a kid. I feel things all the time. I'm definitely open. I'm a believer. My theory is, that we see a limited ray of the light spectrum, and these things exist always around us in the sub and ultraviolet light spectrum. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Thank you, Adrian. Now it's time to take a vote. Which would be scarier to you? Seeing the ghost of a child, then having that sighting validated later on when you become an adult? Or witnessing a bright green ghost as you're trying to sleep as a child? Or possibly are you like me and would welcome either experience with open arms? At least that's my opinion, in the safety of my studio. But it's a wild tale, and we thank you again, Adrian, for taking the time to share it here with us. Now, up next is a story about a child that may or may not have special abilities. Please welcome Chris to tonight's program.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris from Uvalde, Texas, listening to your podcast, and I believe it was season 1, episode 16 or 17, where it was a nice little ghost story about a little girl who was asking why she had to die so young, who had fallen down the stairs to go after her red ball. And you mentioned that it's nice to hear good ghost stories. They all don't have to be scary. Well, I wanted to tell a story about my son. He's 5 now, but the summer of 2021, him, his mother, and her parents, they had gone down to Corpus Christi to the Gulf to go on a little vacation for a weekend, and took his cousins and all that. Well, he's in the back in his car seat, and he's just piddling away, playing with his toys, and apparently he just stops playing with his toys, not completely, but he just starts talking, like full-on conversations. He's 3 at the time, and so, he was coherent, but he just still mumbled and had a good conversation. They said he was talking for a good 20, 30 minutes to absolutely nobody. Kept looking in the seat beside him, laughing, giggling, having fun, having a good conversation. Well, his mom asked him, "Hey, Jace, who were you talking to?" And he says, "My grandpa Bobby." And his mom knew, she recognized the name, but she wasn't for sure. Well, she called me the next day, telling me how their vacation was, sent me some pictures of him playing in the Gulf. Well, she told me about this, and she's like, "Chris, wasn't that your dad's name, Bobby?" My dad had died 22 years prior in 97 in an accident, and my son never knew. Actually, he hadn't even seen a picture, I don't believe, but he had no clue what my dad's name was. He just knew my dad had gone to heaven to be an angel and to be with God and Jesus. That's his kind of thing. When someone's in heaven, they go to see God and Jesus. Well, apparently my dad wanted to come by and visit with his grandson. They said he was talking to him for a good 20, 30 minutes, playing, and he said he wore glasses, which my dad did because he had lost an eye when I was an infant. And they said he just had a good old time talking to his grandpa Bobby, and showed him some pictures whenever I saw him next to my dad. He was like, yeah, that's Grandpa Bobby. He's funny. He's nice. And I just wanted to tell you all that nice little story that loved ones sometimes come back to check on you. Well, thank you so much for your podcast. I've never cared for podcasts until I found yours, and I'm really enjoying it, and I hope to continue to listen. Thank you, and take care.
Thank you, Chris. You know, Delaney reminded me recently that there's a name for these sorts of children that are able to communicate with the dead, or claim to at least. They call them indigo children.
It may sound like science fiction, but a growing network of believers say these types of visions are fact. Teens like Sandy claim they're part of a special generation born after 1978 known as indigo children, for the deep blue auras that psychics say they see around them. Indigo children have high IQs and tend to be rebellious and oversensitive. They're often also said to share special gifts, heightened intuition, and psychic abilities. In recent years, the indigo phenomenon has made its way into movies, books, websites, and even to the therapist's office.
They will say, "I've heard that you deal with indigo children or children who are highly sensitive. Can you help me with my child?"
Now that clip from an old CNN clip from Anderson Cooper 360. And I'm not saying that Chris's boy is one of these indigo children, but I'm not saying he's not either. Tell me the details in this clip from ABC News don't sound eerily similar to what Chris just described.
The first time Lisa O'Brien knew something bizarre was happening was when she found her 4-year-old daughter JC having a conversation in an empty room.
I'd find her talking to herself, and I'd say, JC, who are you talking to? My dad. Talking to Daddy.
But JC's father was dead, killed in the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center. Lisa tried to probe gently.
Okay, and what's going on? Daddy and Tommy McHale. It was always Tommy McHale.
And Tommy McHale was somebody he worked with.
Another one of the boys that he worked with. She named the guys that she had never met before. I showed her a picture and said, do you know who these guys are? And she said, oh, Mommy, those are the boys.
And I named all the boys. I was like, I'm talking to Daddy, Uncle Steve.
And Eddie Shunk and Eamon McEnany.
Now 13, JC vividly remembers it all.
They'd be telling me knock-knock jokes. Yeah, and I was just talking to them.
Now that video is actually about 13 years old. And you know JC is all grown up now. And if she still has these abilities, she's not using them to make money or gain fame. From my research, she's living out a normal life, free of any ghostly visits. But doesn't the story sound a lot like what Chris just told us? About the apparent abilities his son may have, and countless others throughout the paranormal community, I should mention. In fact, I've played and will continue to play several similar calls here on the program, all detailing a child's ability to speak with the other side. So thanks to Delaney, we can now put a name to these experiences. A name that will make discussing them a little easier. Understanding the phenomena, however, well, that's a much taller order. But thank you, Chris, for giving us the opportunity to dip our toes in the water.
Doing our event this weekend. It's a message when you...
That is funny.
Good work with a moment every week to hit
Jerome,
please give light.
you just brought up
Now, if you would, please join me in the state of Virginia, where Sarah is waiting with her very own entry.
Hi, Derek. My name is Sarah, and I am calling from Atlanta, Georgia, but this story actually takes place when I lived in Williamsburg, Virginia. I wanted to start off by telling a little bit about the history that I think might tie into my story. So in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is Colonial Williamsburg, between 1986 and 1989, there was a string of murders on the Colonial Parkway. And the Colonial Parkway is just kind of an old parkway that was used with horse and carriage that circles around Virginia and the neighboring towns. And on the parkway, there was 8 people who were murdered between 86 and 89, and this killer was never caught. There's a ton of theories, but nothing really ever panned out. But one of the theories was that somebody cruising the parkway was using perhaps an old police car to pull over these couples and then murder them. There was actually a man and his son who lived in a farm on the Colonial Parkway where the son actually had an old police car, and they thought he was a suspect. Nothing ever came of it. Anyway, that's sort of the backstory. Where I was living in Colonial Williamsburg, I lived in a neighborhood that was right off of the parkway. If you went through some woods, you could actually walk directly out onto the parkway. And over time, the parkway has been changed. There's whole sections of the parkway that they had to basically block off to recreate the parkway just for flow of traffic and all those sorts of things. So one night, I was probably 14 or 15. I was out with 2 friends, and we were walking in the woods that was behind my house overlooking an abandoned section of the parkway. And this abandoned section of the parkway is deep in the woods, and it was converted to part of a bike trail. So on either side of this piece of the parkway that was probably 80 to 100 feet long, there was wooden bollards to keep cars from coming out. Not that a car could have gotten through the woods, but, keeping people off of dirt bikes and four-wheelers who might wanted to ride down these trails, so it was strictly for bikes. So anyway, we are walking around on the hill that is overlooking this part of the abandoned parkway, and there are 2 colonial graves that are out there. This is, probably sounds weird, but is not super uncommon in colonial Williamsburg to just have, random graves. So these 2 graves were out there. They were from, 1880 to 1886, I think. And we decided, as teenagers do, that we were going to go over there and kind of, commune with the dead and do, a seance and be, spooky, edgy teenagers. So we go back to my house, we get some candles, we get a Ouija board, we go back out there, and we are kind of on our knees with the parkway behind us down a hill through some trees, and we're, setting up these candles and lighting them, and we're going to get ready on the Ouija board. And one of my friends, the guy who was with Bobby, he was like, hey, did you guys hear that? And we did, and we could hear something in the woods. It's dark, it's late, it was probably 11:30. And we stand up and we turn and we look down to the abandoned section of the parkway. And we can see a light, but we can't see much else. And we are a little freaked out by this, so we go around the other side of the headstones, and we're kind of crouching down behind them, and it's just me and my 2 friends. We're crouching, and we're looking over the headstones down at the parkway to try to figure out, what the sound is, and you can hear crunching gravel, and there is this bright light that is now sort of shining through the trees. And as whatever this thing is gets closer, we start to realize that it's a car, and this light is actually a spotlight that somebody looks like they are holding that's attached to their side mirror, and they're shining it through the woods. And this car is rolling slowly towards our location, but they can't really see us. We're up on this hill. And as it's getting closer, we can start making out features of the car. And to me, I discussed this with my friends later, it looked like an old Crown Vic. You can see a shape that is sitting behind the steering wheel with its hand on the spotlight, but I couldn't really make out any details of this shape. There is a sheriff's emblem on the side of the door, but I couldn't see if there was actually anything written over it, if it was saying, Colonial Williamsburg Police, or if it said anything like that. And then it had the bubble light on the top of the car, and it's shining its light, and it's slowly going by, and you can faintly hear an engine sound, and you can hear the tires crunching on the road. And it's very quiet otherwise, but, we know that there can't be a car here. To actually get to this abandoned section of the parkway, you would have to drive probably about 300 to 400 yards on either side through dense forest. To get to this section, you would have to go somehow bypass these wooden bollards. It would just be impossible for a car to be there. So we are at this point terrified. And this light is kind of sweeping. And as it sweeps over us, we crouch down behind the gravestones, and we're kind of looking at each other like, oh my God, you guys, what do we do? What is this? Everything. And as we're crouched down and the light passes over us, it's like the light clicks off and all the sound clicks off and it's silent. And we peek back up over the gravestones to look down, and the car is gone, the light is gone, it is quiet, there is nothing there. And in our, infinite bravery of being teenagers, we run down to the parkway, down this hill, and we're looking around, and it's just the parkway in the woods, the abandoned section. There are no tire prints, there is nothing on either side, no people, nobody on a bike. It was late. Yeah, there was just nothing there. And it was weird because, we talked about it later, and it seemed like it was was this a ghost of perhaps the murderer, even though it was only in the 80s, so that murderer could still be alive and well? Was it some weird time blip? I don't know. We weren't sure what it was, but it was definitely a ghost car. But thanks for listening to my story. I love your podcast. I love all you do, Derek. Thank you, and I am a Patreon member. All right, have a good one, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. What an unnerving experience. Now, since the date that Sarah submitted her entry, it seems that some light has been shed on this mysterious case. It appears as though the killer has been found.
The suspect accused of carrying out the killings is Alan Wilmer Sr. of the Northern Neck.
Because he was never in the system, he was never in the CODIS database, there was no hits. We had a common suspect, he just had not been identified.
It was this summer when investigators say DNA evidence linked Wilmer to the victims. According to Virginia State Police, Wilmer is responsible for the death of 29-year-old Teresa Terry Howell after she disappeared in Hampton in 1989. Wilmer is also accused of shooting and killing 20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards in Isle of Wight County in 1987. The duo became known as victims in a series of double homicides coined as the Colonial Parkway murders. Officials say Wilmer died at 63 years old in 2017 at his Lancaster County home. At this time, he isn't linked to any other unsolved crimes.
Let us know if you knew him, how you knew him, what encounters you had, so we can build that timeline and find out if in fact there are other victims out there.
Now that clip and information via WVEC, ABC News 13 out of Norfolk. But no mention of a police car anywhere in the segment. They did, however, bring up that the killer, or supposed killer, owned a 1966 Dodge Fargo pickup truck, and he also had a boat named the Denny Wade. And you know, I did some digging on the old internets as well, and I didn't find any connection to Wilmer Sr. and the use of a decommissioned police car. So I'm afraid you may have been hiding from the actual fuzz there, Sarah. I imagine someone saw you sneak in, or saw your lights bobbing in and out of the tombstones. And as it is in most cemeteries across the country, it is illegal to be there after nightfall. So I like to imagine the cop was sent there to investigate and got a glimpse of one of the girls peeking out from behind a tombstone, and two got the fright of his life. Now there's no telling what he thought he saw, but it sounds like it was enough to send him packing, post-haste. Which I think is awfully lucky for you, Sarah, and your friend. Especially if it wasn't a ghost car that you guys encountered. Now apart from the serial killer part, this was a fun entry, Sarah. A little bit of history mixed with adventure. And the scariest monster of them all, the human beast. So thank you again for taking the time to call in. Now folks, if you have a story you would like to share here on the show, call our hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or if you're calling long distance, record your story as a voice memo on your phone and email it to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. A quick reminder to submit from a quiet place. 1 story per call. And please finish your story if you start one. Don't leave us hanging. Alright folks, I have one more entry for you this evening. And I am not kidding you when I tell you that this one is all sorts of wild. So Ariel from Oregon, welcome to the show.
Hey Derek, my name is Ariel and I now reside in Portland, Oregon. I've lived all over the U.S. Over the last 10 years, but I grew up for 18 years of my life in southeast Alaska, in Juneau. And I had something happen to me and a friend when we were about 11 years old. So I'm 30 now. That has my head scratching to this day, and I just wanted to get some insight on some possible Tlingit Haida elders who might be listening to this to maybe tell me what I saw. If you are Tlingit Haida, or if you're in Southeast Alaska right now, I will say mute this for about the next 10 seconds because I'm going to say a name that's not necessarily supposed to be said if you are in the woods. So in the Tlingit Haida Nation, they believe in a shape-shifting man called the Kushtaka. This roughly translates to Otterman, and I want to say right now, like, I'm a white person, but I grew up around Tlingit Haida people my entire life. And if you live in Southeast Alaska, you know about this otter person. And you are very much told at a young age, like, what to look out for, so that way you aren't taken by it. But from what I was told when I was young, again, please correct me if I'm wrong or if I misunderstood this, but what I was always told by the elders in my life was that they will lure you to either a far part in the beach or in the woods and take your soul. They will either mimic someone that you know's voice or the sound of a crying baby, and if you look into their eyes, they'll take your soul. So that was what we were told, and me and my friends always knew that if we were in the woods alone and we heard some weird stuff, don't go towards it. So this happened to me and a friend when we were about 11 years old. We were in the woods on a rope swing that we built that was on the side of a mountain. I know that sounds extreme, but growing up in Alaska, I've now known, living in the lower 48, we do a lot more wild things for entertainment than you do in, we'll say, more domesticated parts of the country. And all of a sudden, we just hear this earth-shattering roar come from about 100 yards to our right, and it takes our breath away. And I want to say, like, I've seen more bears than I can count. We don't have moose in that area. There are small mountain cats, like bobcats and lynx, very rarely. There's wolves, but I know what all of these sound like, and I've interacted with all of these animals, and this did not sound like any of that. It almost was like multi-octave. I'm a musician, so if you ever use like an octavator pedal to get multiple octaves for one note you're playing on a guitar, it almost sounded like that. So we hear this and we look at each other and we're like, well, we don't know what the heck that is. And then all of a sudden something just starts trudging after us in the forest as fast as it can. It looks like someone's taking a lawnmower through this foliage. And if you've ever spent time in Southeast Alaska or BC, Canada, or the Pacific Northwest, you know how thick that foliage is. You can't just crash through that. It's a jungle, and we have a lot of spiky stuff and things that can hurt you if you're going too fast. So this thing is coming at us, but the craziest thing is while it's coming at us, it looks like the foliage is being bent backwards. I don't know how else to describe that, but like instead of it going forward in its wake, it's like as it's coming towards us, everything is in reverse. So this thing is coming at us, and we don't hesitate even for a moment, and we jump off this rope swing, and we just book it down this mountain and back to his house. The crazy thing is, too, it's like we couldn't see this thing. There was clearly a path being mowed out from whatever it was. But there was I was expecting to see a giant grizzly bear, and it was just a completely carved out path in the woods with nothing to show for it. It was so wild. So we're running back through this like salmon-filled stream and over all these logs, and we make it to his house, which is on the edge of the woods that we're at. Run through the back door, lock it, and we're little kids, so we sit on the ground, put our backs against the door. And again, I'm expecting to hear bear noises, which if they're challenging you or feel threatened, they'll clack their jaws or they'll do kind of like a... But wasn't hearing any of that. I wasn't hearing anything like wolves. Again, like lynx or bobcat. And it just kind of was like the looming presence of like something was behind us and do not turn around. Like, don't look at it. So we sat there for about 5 minutes, and then we realized it was gone. We didn't go back outside that day. We just stayed in. And you're hard-pressed to get a nice sunny day in Southeast Alaska in July, and we wasted it. We didn't want to go back outside. So we stayed in and played board games instead. I think I told my mom. I don't think I told anybody else. Something I'm just kind of like had with me for a while. I know I've told my sister over the years, but that one was crazy. I don't know what I encountered. And like I said, I spent years of my life wake up, going to the woods for 8 to 10 hours, until it gets dark. But in Alaska, it won't get dark till 2 a.m. Like, I've spent so much of my life in the woods, and I don't know what this was. And again, I'm just looking for if there's a Tlingit Haida elder out there who can call back and respond and maybe tell me if this was the shape-shifting creature. I don't know if this is within the wheelhouse of what they can do or if this was something else. But love the show. I just found it recently. Just wanted to throw one in the bucket and maybe get some answers for what happened to me when me and my friend were kids. All right, take care. Have a good one.
Thanks, Ariel. Well, isn't that something? Something that'll keep you out of the woods, no doubt. But before we move forward on this story, one more warning to our Native American friends. I will be saying the name of this entity a few times tonight. It's just too difficult to be informative without naming the subject that we're actually discussing. So let that be your blanket warning. And look, I'm just some white guy too. I'm certainly no authority on this subject, but I am familiar with the legend, and we did cover it briefly back on Season 8, Episode 15. So I feel like I'm somewhat qualified to discuss this. So let's dive in a little deeper, shall we? On the Kushtaka, better known as the Otterman.
The Otterman is a staple of Tlingit folklore. This blend of otter and human is reported by some to be up to 8 feet tall, earning it the nickname Alaska's other Bigfoot. But it's also believed to be a shapeshifter that can disguise itself as a regular-sized river otter or even as a familiar person in order to lure victims away, where it can capture them and turn them into other ottermen.
Now that clip courtesy of the History Channel program, Missing in Alaska. So we're talking about an 8-foot anthropomorphic otter that can seemingly shapeshift into whatever it wants to, including humans, including friends, including you. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about that I just don't like. And you know, simply saying its name seems to give it some sort of power, like some sort of Beetlejuice. That certainly doesn't make the story any less terrifying. But unlike Beetlejuice, legends of the Kushtaka go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. But you know, despite all that, I was not able to find any first-hand accounts of this creature. At least nothing describing it as an 8-foot otterman. I found one claim from a high school boy that was running in the forest, and he claimed that a Kushtaka shapeshifted into the form of his friend. And when he saw him jogging on the trail ahead of him, then dip into the woods, he called his cell phone to get his attention so they could run together, only to learn that his friend was at home miles away. I don't know, that sounds like a doppelganger if you ask me. But I also found a report from a woman that strayed off the trail on a summer walk, only to find herself surrounded and eventually attacked by a flock of angry black birds. Birds she claimed were a manifestation of the Kushtaka. Now I've linked to each of these stories if you want context and further details. But the point here being, I was not able to locate a first-hand encounter in which an actual creature was sighted and reported. And it seems like Ariel's experience here is no different. Because nothing was actually seen there either. Just an invisible force mowing down all the Devil's Club and berry briars. But if I'm being honest here, if Ariel hadn't mentioned the Otterman, I would have suspected this to be some sort of Glimmerman experience. Another brush with that infamously camouflaged humanoid. A humanoid now seen pretty much all over the country. Whatever it was that the boys saw that day, it sure wasn't normal. And like Ariel, I'd love to get some answers on it. So if you have any suggestions or you're knowledgeable in this legend, hit us up and I'll report back on this story. But that's going to do it for tonight, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you all after the outro, so be sure to stick around. Now, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And please leave us a rate and review wherever you can. And while you're at it, rate and review the film as well. I believe Amazon Prime is an option for that. A few minutes and a few kind words go a long way to help the outreach of our little program there. And while you're online, be sure to give us a like and follow at YouTube, and follow us on social media to get updates on all things Monsters Among Us. Also, don't forget that every Saturday at 11 p.m. Eastern, you can hear Monsters Among Us on the UNX Network. Just visit unxnetwork.com to tune in. And finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey, and White Bat Audio. And that's going to wrap it up for the most part. It's good to have you with us here tonight, but I'll be honest, it'll be better to have you here next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, have a good night.
Leg injury. Reach out your limbs, and this is un apóstol nuestro.
Now it's getting warm out lately, so I imagine many of you are listening to this at night, when it's nice and quiet and cool. Perhaps you're even outside right now, getting a breath of night air, or just taking in the moon. Well, what do you do if you find yourself in such a situation, and you hear a strange voice emanating from the nearby forest? And what do you do when that voice begins to call for help? Do you venture into the woods, or do you crawdad back out of there? Well, let's see what Autumn would do, because here is her secret entry from the state of Kentucky.
Hi, Derek. My name is Autumn. I'm from southeast Kentucky, right next to the Tennessee border, and this is my first encounter with a possible supernatural being. My boyfriend and I were outside on our back patio late at night, nearing midnight. And mind you, there's nothing else behind our house except the Daniel Boone National Forest that butts right up to our fence. At night, I walked out a little into the backyard to look at the full moon, and it was starting to purr to myself. And as I was out there, I heard an extremely distinct and loud, "Hello? Help!" coming from behind the fence line. There was almost no concern or panic in their voice, and the reason I say there is because instead of he or she is because neither of us could tell if it was a man or a woman. It was almost like a mix of both. They sounded extremely calm for screaming for help, and it was almost like their voices playing over a loudspeaker. Like, it didn't sound human for some reason. In reality, if there's someone out in those damn woods actually needing help, it would be with much more panic as well as being repetitive for yelling for help. They wouldn't have only said it once. Because they said it once, I think that's what scared me most, knowing what's out in those woods, because I know there's a lot of stories that came from here. I ran back to the patio, which was maybe 15 feet away from where I was standing, and when I looked at my boyfriend, he was pale white, so I knew he had heard it too. We both immediately went back inside after that. This is my first encounter, and thank you for listening. I love this podcast. Have a good night.
Thank you for calling in, Autumn. I think I would go investigate. Now, I agree there's something fishy about the whole thing, but I suppose hollering for help will sound sort of strange coming from the dark woods, no matter how you say it. So better safe than sorry. Let's make sure everybody's okay. But on the other side of the coin, I completely understand why you would want to hightail it out of there, Autumn. Like I said, it does sound a little fishy. Either way, we thank you for taking the time to share the phone call. Now, folks, I would love for you to join me in the beyond. Just visit monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the Patreon tab. Sign up for the ad-free level or the bonus content level. Then, boom. Well over 100 hours of bonus material, and a slew of the past episodes completely ad-free. And if you're on the fence, feel free to use our 7-day free trial. But if you like what you hear, be a dear and stick around for a month or two, so we get floated a few bucks as well. You have no idea how much it helps the show out. Also, it's the only place you can hear stories like Connor's, out of the country of Canada.
Hey Derek, this is Connor calling from Toronto, Canada. This is not necessarily a ghost story, but just really a curious circumstance that I thought you might find personally interesting, and maybe if anyone else has a similar experience might give more insight. But when I was in grade 12 in high school, I was going to school in the west end of the city of